Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Dean's Dialogue in association with the Daily Apologist. We are going to go ahead and return to our study of the historical reliability of the New Testament. Thank you so much for hanging in there. And if you remember, the last time that I talked about the historical reliability of the New Testament, we looked at things like variants and what some critics say are errors, and we noted that the majority of these variants are minor slips of the pen, misspellings of words and names, and that these are, they're vast, they're many, but they're really no different than common misspellings that take place in high school papers today, right? Now, here's the interesting part, and here's the part that's gonna, maybe make our skin crawl just a little bit, but I promise you it's nothing to worry about. But it is an important point to note that while these minor slips of the pen, misspellings of words and names make up the majority of the variants in the New Testament manuscripts, they don't make up all the variants. And some of these variants are very significant. Now, by significant, I mean that they're completely new sections that have been added into the New Testament, or there's some smaller sections that seem to have some controversy around them in regards to whether or not they're actually in the original. There's some discrepancy about, whether this should be the phrase that's used or this should be the phrase or that phrase should be used. Now, because of this, critics have a tendency to indict the New Testament as being unreliable. So what I'm going to do in the next 4 episodes, just so you know where I'm going, so you can follow along, I'm going to be looking at some of those significant variants and examine those to see just how damning those variants are to New Testament reliability. So what I'm going to ask you to do, for those of you who are listening, I'm going to ask that for this episode and the next episodes that follow, as we move through these significant variants, that you go ahead and bring your Bible with you if you can. If you're traveling shotgun, don't text and drive, don't read and drive. If you're riding shotgun and you want to listen to the podcast, I encourage you to use your mobile device or your tablet to look at the verses that will be in the sections that we'll be talking about. And the first place that we're going to look is 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 in verse 7, but I'm going to lay out the context for you so that we can dive into this section, look at the variant that takes place here, and kind of unpack that and say, hey, how big a deal is this really? So, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "For you yourselves know," this is Paul writing to the Thessalonians, "For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or an attempt to deceive, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak not to please man, but to please God, who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with pretext for greed. God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ, but we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our own selves, because you had become very dear to us." That's 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Now, the question here that a lot of textual critics have is in verse 7. Did Paul write, "We became gentle among you," or did he write, "We became babies among you"? So this particular example illustrates how textual critics have to evaluate two things, both the external and internal evidence. So here, as we've mentioned before, external evidence analyzes the nature and the quality of the manuscript that supports a particular reading by asking questions like, how old are they? What track record of reliability do they have elsewhere? Can they be associated with families or groups of similar manuscripts about which we know more? Do they fall into one of the four major text types of Greek manuscripts based on geographical origin, which tend to have a pattern of variance? Internal evidence tries to identify the reading that best explains how all the other variants in a given verse or portion of a verse derive from it, right? So in the example of 1 Thessalonians 2:7, the strong external evidence supports the reading, we became babies among you. However, Craig Blomberg, a world-renowned New Testament critic, states that the evidence is not highly lopsided in favor of this one view, stating that good early witnesses support gentle as well. So then we move to internally. The context of the text is that Paul just finished talking about how, his companions could have easily asserted that he and his companions could have easily asserted their apostolic authority over the Thessalonians and burden them with financial support. Instead, they behave in an exact opposite way. Now, gentle could fit the contrast very nicely, but textual critics usually work with the principle the harder reading is usually the most original. So young child or babies is the harder reading because Paul immediately shifts to likening himself to a mother caring for her small children, rather than to being a small child himself. With this in mind, the most likely reading is young children. So, what do we gain from this, or what value does this have when we're looking at the controversy of should it be gentle or should it be young children and babies? Which one is it? While the evidence supports, I'm with Blomberg on this, that while I think the evidence supports young children, how many examples in the manuscripts are like this? And as Blomberg says in his book, The Historical Reliability of the New Testament, comparatively speaking, it's few and far between. But here's the question. If we leave gentle, or if it's babies in the text, does it drastically call into question the message that Paul is trying to convey? No. Paul, in an overarching way, is saying, hey, we could have been hard on you guys, but we weren't, right? Does it challenge any Christian doctrine, any core Christian doctrine? No. Does it alter the narrative and the purpose or the flow of 1 Thessalonians? Not at all. And see, this is where I really do struggle with guys like Bart Ehrman and his counterparts in the agnostic atheist community, because the problem with the presentation that they give is not that they ever deny these facts about the variants. However, what they do is they stress, right, without helping the reader keep these variants in perspective, they stress the most dramatic and interesting textual variants to the point where someone walks away from the presentation thinking that the Bible is riddled with all of these errors, and that if we really had the originals, the Bible would read quite differently. But as we've seen, even in this small variant that obviously has some controversy behind it, whether we leave gentle or whether it is young children or babies, it doesn't destroy or it doesn't undercut the message that Paul is trying to convey to his fellow Christians. But what we often see is, well, right here, we don't know whether it's gentle or babies, and so we really don't know. And that's a big issue for New Testament reliability. And we'll see this more with some of the bigger sections like the ending of Mark or John chapter 8 as we move into the other episodes. But what we need to understand, at least about this passage right here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, is that no matter which way the pendulum swings here, no matter which one was in the original manuscript, all the evidence seems to be pointing towards young children and babies. No matter which one you take, it simply doesn't do anything to call into question the historical reliability of this letter, of Paul, of the gospel of Jesus Christ, or core Christianity. And that's what we need to keep in mind when we hear these things from skeptics and agnostics, and probably your everyday, friend who maybe isn't as well versed in these things as Bart Ehrman is in casual. You need to be aware of that for casual conversation. So this is the first variant that we've looked at, and so the next time that I'm on air, we're going to go ahead and look at Mark 16 verses 9 through 20, which is the long indigo mark. A lot more to say about that variant than this variant, but I think we can navigate that and come to the same conclusion. So, in closing, I want to thank everybody that's listening. I want to thank everybody who's visited the website. Make sure if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that. And hey, do us a favor. Sometimes, people ask, how can I help? I don't have the financial means to give and support the work. Hey, the best thing that you can do outside of making an investment financially into the work here is like and share and invite your friends to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. That definitely helps get the content out there. So thank you so much for listening today. This is Dean Meadows signing off for Dean's Dialogue. And hey, remember, equip yourself to engage culture. Have a great day. God bless.